Kurt Lishka was in charge of annihilating a people.
It was a death factory, basically. It was a death factory.
There was no will to bring the Nazi criminals to justice.
The Klarsfelds believe in action.
We had to do something.
There were plots in Germany to kill us.
Nothing would stop them.
Cologne, West Germany. Political activists Serge and Beate Klarsfeld stake out an apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. It is home to Nazi war criminal Kurt Lischka.
It is 100% Lishka's job to organize the arrests, deportation, and the ferrying of the Jews east, which of course is that great Nazi euphemism for exterminating people in camps such as Auschwitz.
A legal loophole protects Nazis like Lischka from prosecution in Germany. The Klarsfelds are on a mission to change the law and make Lischka pay for his crimes.
We had learned that most of the Nazi criminals who had been active in the deportation of the Jews of France had remained in Germany under their own names.
We were very outraged by the fact that they became judges, businessmen, high officials.
They wanted to force the Germans to see that they had in their midst a major Nazi criminal.
The husband and wife team have traveled from their home in Paris to track down the war criminal.
Beate called information in Cologne and had no problem immediately getting an address for Kurt Lischka.
Kurt Lishka, this and this number, and his address, Bergisch-Gladbacher Straße. It was as easy as this.
For Serge, this isn't just about politics. A French Jew, he lost family in the Holocaust.
We saw him leaving to go to work as an accountant. He was a businessman.
But 30 years ago, Lischka had a very different job. As Gestapo chief in Paris, he orchestrated the murder of 33,000 Jews.
He sent out to Paris, where he heads up the Jewish Affairs Department. And that doesn't mean looking after Jews. That means effectively killing them.
He organized the arrest of Jews in France and their deportation to Auschwitz.
And that's his job. He's in charge of annihilating a people.
After the war, he fell in the hands of the Czech authorities. They released him in 1950.
He went back to live in Germany, and he lived quietly with his family and tried to get on with a normal life.
He was a prosperous German businessman.
It's extraordinary to think that someone could have gone from exterminating people to living this sort of upper middle class life, but that was the way it was.
In recent years, Lischka has prospered. He is now a finance executive for a grain shipping company in Cologne.
He was sending grains exactly like Jews. He was sending grains. It's the same work as sending Jews.
The next morning, the Klarsfelds are back on Lischka's street. This time, they've hired a cameraman to try to capture the Nazi on film.
The Klarsfelds found out where he would walk on his way to the streetcar. He had to take the streetcar to get to work in Cologne.
Lishka is not scuttling under rocks. Lishka is living very openly.
And suddenly, we saw a tall man. He was wearing a black coat carrying a briefcase, and was smoking a cigarette. Serge said, "Yes, that's him."
Zigarette rauchend. Und Klarsfeld sagte, ja, das ist er.
It is the start of a dramatic cat-and-mouse chase that will last almost 9 years.
We filmed Lishka when he went out from his apartment.
Nun dachte die Aufnahme.
I started shooting him from one angle to keep him in the frame as long as possible.
Und dann hatte ich auch noch den Filmbereich.
I was following him, walking right beside him.
Gegangen, zu Escalating gegangen.
Lishka started to run.
So I started running too. I kept one eye on the street. My right eye was on the viewfinder, trying to focus on him.
Und hab so praktisch gezielt und
We didn't want to do something against him, but he believes that perhaps we will.
hat wieder die
He hid his face behind his briefcase, and you can see on the tape that he glanced at me.
rübergeblickt, das kann man auf dem Film sehen.
Well, they certainly became his worst nightmare when, in the famous footage, you see the great head of the Gestapo of Paris running like a squirrel, being chased by a dog.
Das war für mich
It was clear to me that this man was a criminal. You could tell by the way he acted.
fast vorgezeigt.
He was fearful of the truth that they brought. It was the truth that was pursuing him, not the Klarsfelds. It was the truth of his crimes.
Wir haben gedreht, bis
We shot until he got onto the streetcar.
weit es ging.
And so we had a very good material of Nazi criminals running in the street in Cologne.
The Klarsfelds hope their film of Lishka will help sway German public opinion. Hunting down Nazi war criminals has become their life's work.
He was this very intelligent, intense young lawyer, and she was an au pair, but she had a very good brain. Serge had sort of opened up Beate's eyes to what had happened during the war.
Beate came to see that as a German, it was her destiny with Serge to force Germany to look at its past.
And their life since then has just been one long, very, very hardly fought campaign against injustice.
In Germany especially, the couple face enormous obstacles.
During this time, the German state networks and legal apparatuses are still riddled with people who are not that interested in hunting Nazis, either because they themselves have something about their own past to hide or they know someone.
In fact, Kurt Lischka has already been convicted of war crimes, not in Germany but in France in 1950. Remarkably, as long as he stays in Germany, he's safe.
People like Lishka were allowed to remain free because there was no framework agreed between the French and Germans on how to get some of these criminals into France to be tried.
The Klarsfelds want to shame Germany into adopting a new law, one that will punish war criminals like Lishka. They released their film to the media,
which were shown in many TV all over Germany and Western world.
but the public outrage they're hoping for never comes.
Nothing happened, there was silence. And I said, you know, you have to react.
Frustrated with government inertia, the Klarsfelds decide on a more radical move.
The Klarsfelds, in their typical fashion, decide that there's only one thing to do with Lishka, and that's not to write letters to members of parliament or lawyers, is to take direct action. These are children of the 60s after all, and they like to stage a happening.
We decided that we will try to kidnap him in order to bring him back to France.
They're going to take him back to France, and they're going to present him to the French authorities and go, right, there, do something about it.
The idea that they would try to kidnap an ex-Gestapo chief It was mind-blowing. It really was.
But to carry out their audacious plan, they need help. Eli is a photographer whose mother died in Auschwitz. Marco is a friend from university. And David is a doctor whose judo skills may prove useful.
And we told them, are you ready to come with us? And we explained the case. And they say yes.
None of them were prepared emotionally or physically, and I think it was only Serge's very strong, persuasive personality that got them on board in the first place.
Beate briefs the recruits on Lishka's daily routine. She has spent days in Cologne spying on him.
He left in the morning to go to his business and then coming back at noon for a lunch at home and going back to his office.
But we understood that it will not be easy. We knew if we will succeed, we will bring him in front of the Ministry of Police in Paris. If we do not succeed, it will be a case which will mobilize public opinion in Germany.
The team travels to Cologne. They rehearse the abduction and finalize last-minute details. But the plan hits a snag when the rental car they've booked isn't available.
They want to rent a car. They've been promised they'll get a certain type which has 4 doors. And when they arrive, the car has only got 2 doors. A 2-door car is the worst type of car you can imagine trying to bundle someone into. Especially someone very tall like Lishka. You can't just shove him in.
It's the first sign of trouble. The day of the kidnap, the team moves into position.
I was, you know, a volunteer in the Israeli army in '67, so I was not afraid by the action.
The idea was, once they had stuffed Lishka into the trunk, they would drive out to the outskirts of Cologne and transfer him to another rented car so that they couldn't be spotted or identified along the way back to France.
They understood that it was now the moment to go after him, you know.
They had the plan. What they didn't have were the personnel who could really carry it out. Somebody really to thwonk Lishka hard on the head.
They're not exactly professional kidnappers.
At the critical moment, Eli loses his nerve and freezes.
I don't think they wanted to go back to France saying, we didn't have the courage to carry out our plan. So having failed once, maybe that bolstered their courage.
In a nearby cafe, Serge rallies his troops. He reminds them why they're here. Kurt Lishka and hundreds of Nazis like him must face justice.
The situation was the same situation for all the Nazi criminals who acted in France, and we wanted to change that situation.
For Serge, in the back of his mind were the screams and the moans of children who first were subjected to terrible arrest. then to an inhuman trip to Auschwitz, and finally to the gas chamber. And Lishka, more than anyone else, was central to that happening in France.
In May 1942, Lishka decreed that all Jews over the age of 6 wear the Yellow Star of David. 2 months later, he ordered the largest mass arrest in French history.
Thousands of Jews were arrested during the great roundup of the Vélodrome d'Hiver on July 16, 1942. 13,000 Jews, among them 4,000 children.
More than half of the victims rounded up that day died at Auschwitz.
If it wouldn't be for the fact that we were not arrested on that day, I would never have seen my 13th birthday.
Simon Jerukum was only saved through the quick action of his father and mother.
She took it upon herself to walk to our cleaning woman who lived in the neighborhood, not very far, and she begged her to have, if we could just stay overnight in her house. I remember that moment because I was looking at my mother, and I still feel to this day, I remember I felt embarrassed that my mother was crying in front of a stranger. And all we were told, you're going to be placed with farmers, they will not know you're Jewish, you have to pretend you're Catholic. I left the house, and that's the last time I saw them. That was the very last time.
I feel that part of myself was in a way arrested. And I share the fate of all those who were arrested and disappeared.
Serge is determined to make the Nazi murderer pay a price. At 12:45 p.m., he leads a second kidnap attempt.
So they go up to Lishka, and in the street, this very tall guy.
We came close to him. One took one hand, one arm, another one took a second arm.
And he's shocked. I mean, as you would be if just some random bloke came and jumped out at you.
And he was very heavy, and it was very difficult to push him. And he started to shout, Hilfe, Hilfe, help, help.
Hits him again, and Lishka sort of collapses to the ground. Not unconscious at all, but just, a little bit dazed and stunned.
He were beating him. He went down on the ground. We were shouting.
They then try to manhandle Lishka into the car. And it's at this point that things go very badly wrong for the team. A policeman has suddenly spotted them.
We ran to the car in order to escape the policeman.
Lishka shouting, I want my hat, I want my hat. And that's all that Lishka and the policeman seem to be worried about. It's sort of high farce almost.
We left for France, and Beate remained behind because she was on the other part of the street. We knew that she could come back by herself.
I don't think they really thought they were going to cross the border into France with Lishka in the trunk of the car. But they knew they were going to cause embarrassment to the authorities.
The Klarsfelds don't have their man, but they hope the bungled abduction will hit the headlines. To their disappointment, the following day, there is barely a mention.
There was very few, and the next day a small article that a man was attacked in the street.
So we called the newspapers. Beate called, like if she was a neighbor of Lishka. How is it possible that nothing is written while this poor Mr. Lishka was put on the ground and attacked by foreigners?
I said, you know, these were French Jews who came to kidnap the former police, the chief of the Gestapo in France.
The next day, it was full of news because the police was obliged to say that, yes, there was an attempt of kidnapping.
Beate decides to go one step further. She returns to Cologne and claims responsibility for the crime.
So the police came and she presented herself as one of the kidnappers.
So immediately Beate say, I organized that attempt of kidnapping because Germany doesn't want to ratify the treaty between France and Germany, and Kurt Lischka was our first attempt.
The police didn't want to arrest her. They understood something was happening here, which was in effect a manipulation of the police.
If Germany won't put a mass murderer behind bars, then Beate will sacrifice her own freedom. March 31st, 1971. Beate Klarsfeld is back in Cologne. She wants to force the authorities to act against the former Gestapo chief of Paris.
It's one thing just to say he was head of this department in Paris during the war, but you've also got to have a paper trail, and you've got to show quite what this man has done, and you've got to show bits of paper with his name and initials on and so on.
Part of the documents concerning the Jews had remained here in France when the German retired.
We had a very solid and heavy file against Lishka.
As they read the documentation of the deportation period, his name was just all over every telex to Eichmann in Berlin. He was what they called the death murderer.
My parents, they were actually trying to go to the non-occupied, what they call the free zone, and they were arrested on the border. And they were sent immediately to Auschwitz. So they were actually gassed in September. I mean, just a month and a half after we were separated. Thinking of them being so young, they were in the early 40s, you know. I didn't want to think about the suffering. This is too much for me to imagine.
It was intolerable to them that criminals of that level should go on unrevenged. Justice had to be meted out to Lishka.
In the company of Holocaust survivors, Beate delivers their dossier on Lishka to the prosecutor in Cologne.
We met the prosecutor of the Lishka case and delivered him the documents, and I said, you know, here I am. I say to you, we wanted to kidnap Lishka. We could not succeed, but I bring in anyway the file about him.
Beate deliberately presents the prosecutor with a dilemma.
If he will arrest Beate, that will make a mobilization among the victims. And if he will not arrest Beate, it will show that the German justice is unable to arrest people who act illegally, like the Nazi criminals.
The best situation for the Klarsfelds was that Lishka would continue to go about his normal life, and Beate would be thrown in jail.
Now, the authorities do act. They don't arrest Lishka. They arrest Beate Klarsfeld.
Beate spends the next 2 weeks in Ossendorf prison.
And every moment of that time was well worth it to the Klarsfelds because it embarrassed the official powers. This young woman is in jail, and this top Nazi is walking around.
Beate and I decided to oblige the German parliament to make a law giving the possibility to judge these criminals.
But Serge knows that shaming politicians may not be enough.
There were powerful men, of course, against such a law giving the possibility to judge Nazi criminals in Germany.
There was no appetite in Germany to go around soul-searching by, arresting people like Lishka and bringing them to trial. There was just no demand for it.
The injustice of Beate's incarceration becomes a cause célèbre.
All the newspapers in France made huge articles.
There are massive protests organized by Serge, free Beate.
Without any powers of their own other than their own courage. It's amazing to think that they found ways to use the press to affirm their moral position.
The authorities cave to public pressure and release Beate on bail.
They upped the ante. They dramatized justice and injustice.
But for the Klarsfelds, the harder they fight to bring Nazis to justice, the more danger they face from those determined to stop them.
One day in their Paris apartment, they had received a parcel, seemingly full of chocolates from an admirer.
It was sent by somebody called Seagal, a Jewish name, but the initial of the first name and the name were SS.
Serge was very suspicious.
So Serge opened carefully the paper, and inside was a box of candy, and in the paper was some black grains.
Luckily, the Beate and the children were away.
A box of candy, which in fact was a bomb, had been sent to them.
So I took the parcel to the police.
So he put it in a plastic shopping bag and walked it down to the police station. And then one of his friends said, "Hey, what do you got in there, Serge?" And he goes, "Hey, I've got a bomb." And the police examine it, and they say, "You are lucky to be alive."
They discovered 300 grams of dynamite and 500 grams of nails.
This is half a kilo of high explosives that would have just torn you, the flat, completely to bits. So, indeed, the Klarsfelds are very lucky.
There were plots by extreme rightists in Germany to kill us.
They put their lives, their bodies on the line willingly.
These threats, we took them seriously, but we never stopped.
May 1973. Beate ups the ante again. 7 months pregnant and flanked by Auschwitz survivors, she marches into Lishka's office to stage a protest.
She was never frightened. She was never, ever frightened.
Now, confronted by his accusers, the modern business executive reveals his true Gestapo colors.
He took a gun to put one of the demonstrators against the wall.
Did he hate the Klarsfelds? He certainly was fearful of them.
He wouldn't have done this without the fact that he was afraid of being punished. Slowly, slowly, with our demonstrative actions, we put pressure on the German society.
The Klarsfelds are really savvy manipulators, and they knew how to present a really good image to the public.
They wanted Germany to deal with Lishka.
That was our strategy.
Serge himself was a child of the Holocaust. I believe he was 8 years old when his father was taken away.
It was September 1943. The Gestapo burst into Serge's home. He, along with his sister and mother, hid in a secret compartment inside their closet.
And they started to look for us, and one German opened the door of the closet, and he put aside all the clothes like that, but he didn't touch the wood. And in the morning, when the Germans were no more there, we escaped.
The young Serge didn't know what had happened to his father.
We phoned to the German prosecutor saying, you know, if you do nothing in order to judge the criminals, one day somebody will come with an armed weapon and kill Lishka.
Despite the pressure, there is still no movement among German lawmakers. In December 1973, 3 years after their hunt began, Serge can wait no longer. He will take the law into his own hands.
Serge traveled alone with a pistol to Cologne.
I knew that the threat of killing Nazi criminals will not be believed until we would show it effectively.
If he couldn't get justice through the court system, he would finally have to administer justice himself.
I waited Lishka to go out from his office, to go to his car. When he arrived to his car, I, by surprise, arrived with a gun.
Serge took that pistol and shoved it in his face.
He was shouting and afraid.
Lishka! I put the gun on his head.
Lishka's eyes bulged out.
I immediately believed that he will be killed.
Just like his victims 30 years earlier, Kurt Lishka is forced to stare death in the face. One of those victims was Serge's father, Arno Klarsfeld. Like thousands of other French Jews, he was deported on the Gestapo chief's orders.
He was sent to Auschwitz. He survived until August 1944, and then he died.
Lishka was the single major figure in the murder of French Jews who was still alive and still could be punished, and if no one else was going to do it, then he would do it.
I decided that I did not survive for nothing.
Lishka thought he was about to die.
Lishka! I decided not to kill because that would be an act of despair. I didn't shoot. I smiled, I laughed, and I left running.
Shoving a revolver between the eyes of Kurt Lishka was a symbolic murder. And this was his way of saying, we want justice, we don't want revenge.
Serge went back to Paris, and again, then we phoned to the German prosecutors.
I told them, you see, if we want to kill these criminals, we can, even with a gun, even protected, and it will happen if you do not do your duty.
Eventually, after much toing and froing and a lot of pressure from the Klarsfelds, eventually the law is passed.
We obtained finally the ratification.
It was done in January 1975.
5 years after their campaign began, the new law is enacted. It is dubbed the Klarsfeld Law, in recognition of their tireless effort. But their fight is far from over. Lishka and other Nazi criminals must now be brought to judgment.
We were leading a war against these Nazi criminals.
They had found a way to use their own ingenuity, their own courage, their own lack of fear about what might happen to them to accomplish great things.
July 1978, 2 years after the Klarsfeld Law was passed, German police arrest Kurt Lischka for the murder of 33,000 French Jews.
I think the most important was that these men we had confronted before at this time never thought that one day they would be judged.
So it became possible to have a trial in Cologne.
At that time, we were very, very happy.
The forthcoming trial stirs up a real hornet's nest of neo-Nazi activity against the Klarsfelds.
During the night, we heard an explosion, and Beate told me what it is. I believe it's our car.
In the garage at the bottom of the apartment block where the Klarsfelds live, the car is blown to pieces by a car bomb. Subsequent investigations revealed that the car bomb was intended to go off when Serge was driving his daughter to school. So this was actually an act of attempted murder. So much the bravery of the Klarsfelds that doesn't stop them.
If you are obsessed with security, you cannot do anything.
October 23rd, 1979. The Kurt Lischka trial opens.
Even though Lishka have been brought to trial, the Klarsfelds don't end it there. I mean, they never say never. They decide that the best way to help impress upon the German public the severity of the crimes he's being tried for, they have a lot of former French concentration camp inmates turning up wearing their concentration camp uniforms with the yellow Star of David on it.
Also on trial for war crimes are Lischka's deputy, Ernst Heinrichsen, and Herbert Hagen, a high-ranking SS leader in wartime France.
They brought in the 3 defendants and put them in kind of a fenced-in area. And they looked like 3 businessmen. They had looks on their faces like, oh, why are you doing this to us? You know, what is this all about? We're not criminals.
For the verdict, the Klarsfelds pull one last stunt. They charter a special train from France carrying 1,500 Jews.
It was the trains and the cattle wagons that took the Jews eastwards from France through Germany and to the extermination camps. This train was seen as a highly symbolic act of bringing a train of Jews, French Jews, into Germany for the trial.
It was a big march through the streets of Cologne. The youngsters were staying outside and shouting, Lishka murder, Hagen murder.
French Jews who had been powerless suddenly felt, yes, we are a people.
9 years after the Klarsfelds first staked out Kurt Lischka's apartment, all 3 defendants are found guilty.
I think catching those murderers is something that People like myself, let's say from my generation, would feel a great deal of, I wouldn't say the word joy. You know, justice had been served in some ways.
Nobody would ever have identified the principles of the final solution in France if it weren't for the Klarsfeld.
And Lishka was sentenced to 10 years of jail.
Although Lishka is sentenced for 10 years, he in fact only serves 5 years, and he's released in the mid-1980s on grounds of ill health, and he dies in a nursing home.
The Lishka trial was for us the trial of those who lived unpunished in Germany during more than 30 years and eventually were sentenced by a new Germany.
With our work, we obliged them to do something what they didn't want.
It's very hard to imagine the depth of commitment of this couple. They were bonded together in a commitment unto death, if that's what it took.
The crimes are never forgotten. At the very end, these criminals can be judged for the crimes they had committed.